The metal door slid open with a sharp hiss, and Private Mason Hale stepped inside the cold research hall. The lights above flickered in a pale blue glow, casting shadows over glass cells lined in a perfect row. Each one held something strange, some alien life form or machine. But at the very end of the corridor was her. The one everyone whispered about. They called her the Wild One. Every soldier on the station knew the story. The alien girl they had captured from the ruins of a burning planet. The creature who killed 3 guards when they tried to move her. Some said she was a beast. Others said she was part of some long-forgotten race. But to Mason, she was just another prisoner, alone, frightened, and misunderstood. The commander walked beside him, his boots echoing against the steel floor. "You sure you want this assignment, Hale?" he asked with a smirk. "We usually send in drones to feed her. Last guy who tried went home with half his arm missing." Mason said nothing. He just kept walking, eyes straight ahead. When they reached the cell, the commander typed a code and the transparent wall shimmered. Inside, in the farthest corner, crouched the alien girl. She was small, no taller than Mason's shoulder, but there was a wild, dangerous energy around her. Her skin was pale silver, faintly glowing under the dim light. Her eyes burned like liquid gold, sharp and unblinking. Her hair fell in tangled strands down her back, and she wore a torn lab cover that barely covered her frame. She looked starved. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and when the door made a sound, she flinched like an animal ready to strike. "There she is," the commander said proudly. "The Wild One, you've got 10 minutes. Just don't lose a limb," Mason frowned. "She has a name?" The commander snorted. "She doesn't deserve one. She's not human." But Mason wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at her, really staring. He could see the fear in her movements, the trembling in her shoulders, the way she pressed herself into the corner like she wanted to disappear. When the door to the cell opened, the commander gave him a mocking salute. "Good luck, hero." Then the door shut behind him with a loud clang, locking him in. The sound echoed like a death sentence. For a long moment, Mason didn't move. The girl's golden eyes were fixed on him. Her breathing was fast and shallow like a trapped bird. He slowly crouched, lowering himself to the floor so he wouldn't look threatening. His voice came out calm and gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you," she hissed softly in response, a sound between a growl and a whisper. Her claws scratched the floor as she backed away. Mason reached into the bag he carried and carefully placed a tray on the floor, some bread, fruit, and a cup of water. He slid it toward her and then sat back with his hands visible. For several minutes, nothing happened. The girl's eyes darted between him and the food. Then, cautiously, she crawled closer. She didn't stand, she moved low like a predator ready to run. Her thin fingers snatched the bread and she tore into it quickly, eating like she hadn't tasted food in days. Mason didn't speak. He just watched quietly, letting her feel safe. After a while, she slowed down, chewing softer, her gaze flicking toward him again. There was confusion in her eyes, like she couldn't understand why he wasn't afraid. "See?" he said softly. "I told you. No harm." Her brow furrowed as if she was trying to understand his words. Then she pointed at herself and made a low sound, something that almost sounded like a name. "Alicia Lyra." Mason blinked. "Lyra?" She nodded, still cautious, her golden eyes studying his face. The name hung in the air, gentle and fragile. When the intercom buzzed, Mason heard the commander's mocking voice. "Still alive, Hale? Or did she chew you up already?" He ignored him. Instead, he smiled at the girl. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." She tilted her head, uncertain, but for the first time, she didn't hiss. She didn't growl. She just watched him with quiet curiosity. When the guards finally opened the door and pulled him out, Mason looked back one last time. Lyra was still there, clutching the cup of water he had left. And for a brief second, she raised her hand just a little, trembling, but it was enough, a silent thank you. Mason didn't know it yet, but in that small, fragile gesture, something powerful had begun, something that would soon change both their lives forever. The next morning, Mason woke early. The station halls were quiet except for the hum of machines and the low voices of guards changing shifts. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the alien girl who called herself Lyra. Her eyes had haunted him all night. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of someone who had forgotten what kindness looked like. When he arrived at the observation room, the scientists were already there, their faces pressed to the thick glass. They watched Lyra move in her cell, whispering notes into their recorders like she was some kind of lab animal. Subject 17 shows signs of calm behavior after extended exposure to human interaction, one of them said. Another replied, "We'll test if she recognizes the same human again." "Let's send Hale in." Mason clenched his jaw. "Recognizes the same human as if he didn't have a name." As if she didn't either. When the metal door opened, he stepped in slowly. The air inside the cell was colder today. Lyra was crouched in the same corner as before, her arms around her knees. Her eyes flicked toward him, then quickly away. Mason sat down on the floor again, cross-legged, keeping his voice gentle. "Hey, Lyra, remember me?" She didn't answer. She just stared at the tray in his hands, the food he brought. He placed it near her and didn't move. A few minutes passed. Then cautiously she crawled closer, her golden eyes never leaving his face. She picked up the fruit this time, sniffed it, and took a small bite. Mason smiled. "You're learning what's good, huh?" Her head tilted slightly, curious about his tone. "Good," she repeated, the word rough and broken. Mason blinked. "You can talk?" Her lips moved slowly, struggling to shape the words. "Good food." He couldn't help but laugh softly. "Yeah, good food." Her eyes widened a little at the sound of his laugh. She wasn't used to it. She had probably never heard laughter that wasn't cruel. For a long time they sat in silence. The only sound was the soft chewing and the hum of the lights above. Mason didn't push her to talk. He just let the silence sit there, calm and peaceful. Something Lyra had probably never felt before. When he stood up to leave, she spoke again, her voice quiet and shaky. "You gonna come back?" The words hit him harder than any weapon could. He nodded. "Yeah, I'll come back." She didn't smile. He doubted she even knew what that was. But her eyes softened just enough to make his chest ache. The next few days became a quiet routine. Mason brought food, talked softly, and stayed as long as the scientists allowed. He told her stories, not about war or blood, but about Earth, about trees that moved with the wind, about rivers that sang, about the warmth of sunlight. Lyra listened carefully, her eyes half closed. Sometimes she would ask small questions in her rough, broken voice. "What is river?" "It's water that moves," Mason explained, tracing a line on the floor with his finger. "It flows. It shines when the sun hits it." She blinked slowly. "Water that moves." She whispered the words like they were something sacred. "Your world sounds soft." Mason smiled sadly. "Not always. But there were moments. Beautiful ones." Lyra lowered her head. "My world was soft once. Before fire came." Her voice cracked on the last word. Mason didn't ask what she meant. He could see it in her trembling hands, the memory of destruction, loss, and pain. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But he didn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready for touch. From behind the glass, the scientists were confused. "Why hasn't she attacked him?" one asked. Another shook his head. "Humans have strange effects on alien psychology. Maybe she sees him as one of her own." But Mason knew better. She didn't see him as one of her own. She saw him as something she hadn't met in a long time, someone who didn't want to hurt her. That day, as he stood to leave, Lyra did something that made every scientist in the room fall silent. She stood too. She took a single step toward him. Just one. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold floor, but her eyes met his, steady, strong, unafraid. Mason felt his heart tighten. It was such a small thing, one step, but it meant the world. When the door shut behind him, he heard her voice, soft and trembling. "Come. Back." He looked at the viewing glass, knowing the scientists were still watching, and said quietly, "I will." That night, alone in his bunk, Mason couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her voice in his head, the fragile words, the longing behind them. Somewhere deep down he knew what was happening. The walls she had built were cracking, the wild was fading, and all it took was a little kindness. The next morning, the air inside the cell was colder than usual. Mason Hale pushed open the metal door, and a faint smell of ozone mixed with the alien's natural scent hit him. Lyra was sitting cross-legged, hunched forward, her golden eyes staring into the corner. But when she heard the door, she raised her head. "You, back?" she whispered, voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Mason nodded. "I told you I'd come back." He stepped inside slowly, careful not to make her feel trapped. Did you sleep okay? Lyra shook her head. No. Too loud. The hum of the station bothered her. Pain. Ears. He knelt down beside her, his hands empty, showing no threat. I'll turn the lights off. He pressed the switch, plunging the room into soft darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of her skin and the small console blinking nearby. She blinked, adjusting to the dimness. For a moment she just looked at him, curiosity and suspicion warring in her eyes. Then she whispered, You care? Mason's chest tightened. He didn't answer immediately. He simply nodded. I do. That one word, so simple, seemed to shift something in her. Lyra leaned back slightly, the first sign of comfort since he had entered the cell. She traced the floor with one claw, drawing random lines as if trying to understand what it all meant. Outside, the scientists were growing anxious. Her response to Hale is unprecedented, one muttered. She's not attacking him, she's learning from him. Behavioral conditioning is supposed to be controlled, another replied. But she's changing. And he's changing her. This is not what we planned. Inside the cell, Mason continued talking softly, telling her about Earth again. He told her about the wind that carried scents of flowers, the rivers that glimmered under the sun, and the rain that washed everything clean. Lyra listened, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes growing slightly wider with each word. Your world. Alive, she said finally, voice trembling but steady. My world. Dead. Mason reached out, stopping short of touching her. I can't fix what's gone, he said gently, but maybe I can help you remember something good. For the first time, Lyra's lips curved, barely, in a shape that resembled a smile. It was fleeting, almost too quick for Mason to notice, but it was there. Over the next few days, a subtle trust began to grow. Lyra stopped hissing at his movements. She no longer flinched when he sat beside her. She even began to mimic some of his words, though haltingly and with effort. One evening, Mason noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Lyra had scars along her arms and back, deep and cruel, proof of the pain she had endured before coming here. Her glowing eyes avoided his gaze as he reached out, careful not to scare her. What, they do? He asked softly. Her claw trembled as she traced one scar, but she didn't answer. Her silence spoke volumes. Mason's heart ached for her. He had seen suffering before, but nothing like this. Nothing that carried the weight of fear, abandonment, and a life stolen. He sat in silence for a while, simply letting her know he was there. Slowly, she leaned her head against his shoulder, not fully trusting, not fully surrendering, but enough to make his chest tighten with an unexpected warmth. Outside the cell, the scientist whispered frantically. We didn't anticipate this. The human is bonding with a dangerous subject. This could compromise the experiment. Mason, unaware of the voices beyond the glass, kept talking quietly. He spoke about courage, about hope, about not giving up even when everything seemed lost. He told her stories of people who survived wars, who found love in impossible places, who forgave when they didn't have to. Lyra listened, eyes wide, and for the first time, she spoke more clearly. You human, different. Not kill me? Mason smiled softly, his voice low and steady. I told you, Lyra, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The wildness, the fear, the anger. The instinct to survive at all costs was still there, but it was softened, tempered by the smallest spark she had felt in a long time. Trust. That night, as Mason left the cell, he felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. He had started something he couldn't stop, something powerful. Lyra had begun to see humanity not as a threat but as a possibility. He didn't know what the scientists would do, or how far this bond could go. All he knew was that for the first time, the wild alien girl had allowed someone to be near her, not as a captor, but as a friend. And Mason knew deep in his heart that this fragile connection could either save them both, or destroy everything around them. The alarms rang suddenly, shattering the quiet of the station. Mason Hale's heart jumped. The loud klaxon echoed through the cold metal halls, sending a shiver down his spine. Lyra's eyes widened in panic, and she hissed softly, crouching low in the corner. What's happening? She whispered, voice trembling. Mason stood, moving slowly toward her, hands open and calm. It's okay, Lyra. Stay with me. Outside the cell, the scientists and guards were panicking. Some of the junior guards pointed at the observation screens, She's agitated.
She's going to attack.
Mason ignored them. He focused only on Lyra. The alarms blared, the lights flickered, and in the chaos, someone tried to open the cell remotely. A shock rod buzzed across the glass. Lyra shrieked, her scream piercing the air like broken glass. "No!" Mason yelled, rushing forward. He slammed his body against the panel, forcing the door closed. Sparks flew. The guards froze. Mason could feel the heat of anger boiling in him. Not at her, but at them. At the cruelty of locking a terrified child in a cold cage. The commander's voice came over the intercom, sharp and cold. "Hale, step away from the controls. That alien is dangerous. You are endangering yourself in the station." Mason's voice shook, but he refused to move. "She's terrified." "Not dangerous. Can't you see what you're doing to her? Disobey orders and you'll regret it." The commander barked. Mason's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. "Regret? You've been hurting her from the day she arrived. And you call me the problem?" Through the glass, Lyra trembled but stayed close to him, watching his every movement. She didn't understand all the words, but she could feel the raw emotion. The human anger, the refusal to let harm come to her. It was a language she understood better than any of theirs. One guard reached for the control panel again, and Mason shoved him back with all his strength. Sparks flew, and the officer stumbled into the wall, groaning. "Stay back," Mason roared. "Don't you dare touch her!" For a moment, the room went silent except for the alarms. Mason looked down at Lyra. Her eyes glowed faintly, wide and full of fear and trust at the same time. She took a hesitant step toward him, then another, until she was close enough to press herself against his side. "You protect?" she asked, voice small and broken. He nodded. "Always. I won't let anyone hurt you." The alarm stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie quiet in its place. The guards and scientists stepped back, unsure of what to do next. Mason's chest heaved. He was shaking, not from fear but from the rush of emotion, from the fierce protectiveness that had taken hold of him. Lyra, sensing his emotion, did something unexpected. She wrapped her small arms around his leg, holding on tightly as if saying, "I trust you. Please don't leave me." Mason knelt and rested a hand gently on her head. He could feel the tremor of her body through the thin silver skin. He whispered softly, "I'm right here. No one is going to hurt you." The scientist watched through the glass, stunned. This wasn't the behavior of a wild alien. She wasn't violent, not with him. The human had done what they could not, earned her trust. They scribbled notes frantically, whispering theories and warnings, but Mason didn't notice. For hours they stayed like that. Mason sat on the floor. Lyra pressed against him, and slowly her trembling stopped. Her breathing grew steadier. Mason talked quietly, telling her stories of Earth again, of calm seas, of forests and sunlight, of people who fought battles not with claws and teeth but with courage and kindness. Eventually, the door opened to check on him, but Mason stood and stepped between Lyra and the intruding guard. "She stays where she is. I'm leaving only when I say it's safe." The guard hesitated, then backed away. Mason's jaw was tight. His mind was racing, but one thing was certain. Nothing in that station mattered more than protecting Lyra. When he finally sat back down, Lyra curled herself around his legs, holding him like she had found the last piece of safety in the universe. Mason rested his hand on her head and whispered, "We'll get through this. I promise. Together." The storm of alarms, fear, and human cruelty had passed, for now. But Mason knew that this bond, this fragile connection, had just grown stronger. The station could try to break them, but Lyra had found something they could never take away. A human who saw her as more than a wild animal. And Mason had found something in her too. A reason to fight harder, care deeper, and hope that even in the darkest corners of space, trust could survive. By the 5th day, something had shifted. The tension in the cell, once thick enough to cut with a knife, had softened into something fragile, almost tender. Mason Hale entered with the usual tray of food, but this time Lyra didn't flinch. Her golden eyes followed him calmly as he set the tray down. "You, come," she said, her voice rough but steady. "I told you I'd come back," Mason said softly, kneeling beside her. He noticed the small tremor in her hands as she picked up a piece of fruit, tearing it slowly. "How are you feeling today?" Lyra stared at the piece in her clawed hand before looking up at him. "Better. Little better," she said, her words halting. Mason smiled gently. "Good, we'll make it better every day. I promise." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy like before. It was quiet, safe, filled with understanding. Mason could see the change in her. The way she no longer pressed herself into the corner. The way her breathing had slowed. The way her eyes lingered on him instead of darting nervously at the door. Tell story? She whispered finally, her voice trembling. Mason's curiosity piqued. You want to tell me your story? Lyra nodded, her small shoulders tense but hopeful. She began slowly, struggling with words and memories. My world fire. People gone, only me alone. Her voice cracked and she pressed a claw to her chest as if holding in the pain. Mason's heart ached. He reached out slowly, careful not to startle her. I'm sorry, he said softly. I can't imagine the pain you felt. She shook her head. Not your fault, bad. Others. Her golden eyes glimmered with unshed tears. Hurt me much, Mason swallowed hard. But you survived. That means something. It means you're strong. For a moment she just stared at him. Then she whispered, strong. Human too? Mason's lips curved into a small, sad smile. I hope so, he said. But I'm learning from you. You teach me what real strength looks like. Her gaze softened, and for the first time she reached out, not fully trusting, but just enough to brush her fingers against his arm. The touch was light, hesitant, yet full of meaning. Mason felt a warmth spread through him he hadn't known he needed. You teach me? She asked. I hope so, he said. We can teach each other. Over the next hours, Mason and Lyra talked more. He told her about Earth, its soft rain and tall green forests, about people who forgave even when it was hard, and about hope that never died. Lyra listened carefully, sometimes repeating words, sometimes closing her eyes to imagine the things he described. She began to hum, a soft, trembling sound that reminded Mason of a song, though alien in tone. You, like human world? She asked finally. I do, Mason said, his voice low, but I like this world more right now, because of you. Her golden eyes widened at his words and she leaned a little closer, not fully, but enough for Mason to notice her fragile trust. She was testing the boundaries, feeling safe, learning what it meant to have someone care without fear or cruelty. Outside, the scientists noticed the change and whispered frantically. This is unprecedented. The subject is bonding, emotionally, with a human. We did not program for this. Mason didn't care. The bond wasn't programming. It was raw, real, and entirely human, built on trust, kindness, and the smallest gestures of empathy. As the day drew on, Lyra curled slightly against Mason's side, her small body relaxing for the first time. She pressed her glowing cheek lightly against his leg, just enough to make him feel her fragile warmth. Mason rested his hand on her head, brushing a strand of tangled hair back. You're safe now, he whispered. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Her eyes glimmered with tears and she whispered back almost a breath, I trust you. It was a fragile word, but to Mason it was everything. In that moment he understood something profound. Trust was stronger than fear, kindness stronger than cruelty, and even the wildest heart could be touched by the gentleness of another. And for both of them, that quiet moment was the beginning of a bond that neither captivity nor violence could ever truly break. The morning alarm blared, louder than ever. Mason Hale sat up instantly, his eyes scanning the cell. Something felt different. The guards were moving faster than usual, shouting orders that cut through the station like knives. Mason's heart raced. Lyra, crouched in the corner, flinched at every sound. Her golden eyes darted nervously, her claws scraping the floor. Mason moved quickly toward her. It's okay, Lyra, stay close. Don't be afraid, the intercom buzzed. The commander's cold voice rang out. Hale! Observation shows increased bonding. You're endangering the station. Keep the alien contained. Mason clenched his fists. She's not a weapon. She's a person, he shouted back, his voice echoing in the empty hall. Lyra's small hand reached for his leg, trembling. Mason knelt down beside her. We're going to get through this together, he whispered. I won't let them hurt you again. The guards approached the cell armed with stun rods. Mason's chest tightened. They didn't understand. They only saw danger. Lyra didn't see it the same way. She saw him. When a guard tried to open the panel, Mason reacted instinctively. He shoved the man back hard and sparks flew. The alarm blared even louder. Lyra screamed, but Mason's voice cut through her panic. Listen to me, Lyra. I've got you.
Stay with me.
Her eyes met his, wide and terrified, yet filled with a fragile trust that had taken days to build. Slowly, she moved closer, pressing herself against his side. Mason could feel the heat of her tiny body trembling against him. You leave? She asked in a whisper. No, Mason said firmly. I'm not leaving. For a moment, everything froze. The guards hesitated, unsure what to do. Mason stood, shielding Lyra with his body, his eyes blazing with determination. If you hurt her, you'll have to go through me first, he warned. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Mason wasn't just a human, they realized he was different. He was more than a soldier following orders. He was a protector, and nothing could break his resolve. Then Mason noticed something, a small maintenance hatch behind the cell. It was just big enough for Lyra to slip through. If he could distract the guards, they could escape. He crouched low. Lyra, stay behind me, he whispered. When I open the hatch, run. Don't look back. Her hand gripped his leg tightly. Together? She asked. Together, Mason promised. With a deep breath, he shoved one guard into the wall and swung toward the hatch. Sparks flew as the panel opened. Lyra hesitated for a fraction of a second, then, seeing Mason's steady gaze, she scrambled through the small opening. Mason followed quickly, the guards shouting behind him. The narrow maintenance tunnel smelled of oil and metal, but Mason ignored it. His focus was only on Lyra. She moved like a shadow beside him, small and quick yet full of determination. As they turned a corner, another guard appeared, blocking their path. Mason didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby pipe, swung it with precise force, and knocked the guard aside. Lyra gasped but didn't falter. She understood instinctively. Mason was protecting her, and she had to trust him completely. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a service hatch leading to the station's outer corridor. Mason pried it open, and Lyra squeezed through, her small body almost invisible in the shadows. Go, he whispered urgently. I'll cover you. Her golden eyes filled with tears. She pressed herself against his leg, wrapping her arms around him in a sudden, desperate embrace. I won't forget, she whispered. Mason hugged her gently, feeling the fragile warmth of her body. I won't forget either. We'll meet again, I promise. Then he pushed her forward, and she slipped through the hatch. The metal door closed, and Mason turned to face the approaching guards. His chest heaved with exhaustion and adrenaline. He didn't know if he could hold them off, but he wasn't thinking about survival anymore. He was thinking about Lyra, somewhere deep inside. Mason realized something profound. She had given him a gift no human could ever replace, the trust of a being that had known nothing but fear. As the alarms blared and the lights flickered, Mason braced himself. Lyra was free, and for the first time he felt the weight of hope. 3 days passed in silence. The station buzzed with confusion and anger. Mason Hale was gone. No one knew how he had vanished from the heavily secured research hall, and the logs were mysteriously wiped. The guards whispered in fear. The scientists muttered theories, but no explanation made sense. The wild alien girl Lyra was gone too, or so they thought. Far above the planet in the cold emptiness of space, Lyra's silver starship glided silently. The vessel gleamed under the light of a distant star, its hull marked with strange symbols that shimmered like gold in the darkness. Inside, she sat quietly, her golden eyes reflecting the memories of the past days. She had survived because of one human, Mason Hale. Her small hands traced the faint scars along her arms, the marks of cruelty she had endured. She pressed a claw to her chest where her heartbeat echoed against the rhythm of the ship's engines. Mason had risked everything for her, shielding her from harm, teaching her trust and showing her that not all humans were cruel. A soft hum echoed in the cabin. Lyra leaned forward, staring at the control console, remembering his words. I won't let anyone hurt you. I promise. That promise had been a lifeline, a thread connecting her to hope for the first time in her life. Suddenly, the comm system beeped. Her heart skipped. The voice of her people, others from the edge of her destroyed world, filled the cabin. Lyra, where is the human who helped you survive? She swallowed hard. He had stayed behind. He made sure I could escape. Her voice trembled. I owe him everything. The response was a silent pause, then an acknowledgement. The alien soldiers, the elite of her race, knelt in respect. She was their survivor, but Mason had earned their gratitude too. Though he was human, a species they had often dismissed as fragile and cruel, he had proven something rare: courage, kindness, and loyalty beyond measure. Lyra's eyes glimmered with tears. She rose and pressed a claw to the starship's viewport. Somewhere below, the station was still operational. Somewhere below, people believed the wild girl had escaped alone. They had no idea the human had made it possible. Her memory of Mason's calm voice and steady presence warmed her like sunlight. She remembered how he had stayed by her side while the alarms blared, how he had protected her from the guards, and how he had listened to her story without judgment. Every detail, every word was etched into her being. She spoke softly to the empty cabin. "You taught me to trust. You taught me that even a human can be heroic." The silence answered her, but she didn't feel alone. Mason's courage was with her. His compassion had changed the course of her life. She had been called wild, dangerous, uncontrollable, but through him she had learned safety, empathy, and hope. The starship descended toward the ruins of her homeworld. Lyra's fingers